engaged client interviews my director level candidate. During the interview, the client tells the candidate that they hired a director yesterday and haven't even had time to tell Gary. They haven't had time to tell me. But we're still interested in interviewing him for a senior sales manager role. He's okay with it, and they can still pay him a $150K base. All right. So I provided this candidate on Friday. They expressed interest and interview him on Wednesday, knowing they are already extending an offer to another candidate. This has happened a few times in the past 16 months. I imagine Gary means with that same client. Detailed proposals are sent out, company pays an engagement fee, signs the contract, discussions about exclusivity and the process are discussed, yet they recruit behind my back. Those jerks. It's professionally embarrassing, probably more to my ego and trust of the company than anything else. It doesn't appear companies care about the engagement fee, muddying up the water, the trust relationship with the headhunter, etc. Any ideas on what can be done to prevent this client behavior, Tricia?
Yeah, I have some real ideas for you here, Gary. But first, let me just say, this idea of they recruited behind my back. I want to just dive into that a little bit because they didn't recruit behind your back, Gary. They filled their job. And I think that sometimes we lose sight of the fact that the hiring manager, our client companies, they have this real need to fill a role. Clearly, it's a real need because they engaged you and they paid you an engagement fee. So they're doing whatever they can in order to fill their job. When I look at this situation, there's a couple of things that would bother me that I think are legitimate concerns. I would have a conversation with the client to say, hey, please don't put me in a situation where my candidate is telling me that you hired a director yesterday and you haven't had time to tell me. It takes 2 minutes to send me an email, and I would appreciate it if you could do that because it's embarrassing for me with my candidates if I don't know what's going on with you. So I'd give them a little hand slap over that. I absolutely would. That should never happen. Now, at the same time, they hired a director level candidate and they still wanted to see your candidate. That's a celebration. I think that's great that the position didn't just go away and you still have the opportunity to fill the job.
Now, what I'll say is I get the embarrassment there, and I get that the ideal would be to fill both of those roles and get both of those fees, but always come at this with their best interest at heart. And it can be, and we've certainly seen times where they hire out from under us, and their own candidate doesn't work out. And this does happen, and I'm sure it's happened to many of you. And then they come back to you a few months later. Now all the people you surfaced are cold and uninterested, and you've got to kind of start over. But at the same time, what you've really done is given yourself more credibility, or they have, at the expense of their own hiring decision. So this is the kind of thing that is certainly temporarily frustrating, but ultimately not a terrible thing.
Right. So one thing that I want to just talk about quickly, and I hope that this really resonates with all of you, I think that we have situations that occur as recruiters where either like Gary in this situation, let's pretend that they hired the director and they didn't want to see Gary's candidate anymore, right? They filled their job. Or let's say that Gary's candidate came back and said, hey, you know what? I'm not interested in your company anymore. I got an offer from another company, which isn't through you, and I'm going to accept that job. I think what our natural instinct to do when we lose a deal is to, pout. Like, it's upsetting when we have a candidate that we think is going to get hired, or we have an opening that we think we're going to fill and then we don't. And I want to change your thinking on that a little bit. Don't pout. Don't be upset. Even if you have to pretend, I want you to celebrate with that client. Celebrate with that candidate. Be excited for them. Your client filled an opening that they really needed to fill. Your candidate found a great opportunity for their career. Even though neither one of those two might equate to you getting paid, You will sour the relationship with the client or the candidate if you don't celebrate with them.
I like to think of this, put it in terms of, let's say it's your kid and they go out and they ask you for a little help. Like, hey, I understand, what you do for a living. And so you probably have some good tips on getting a job, mom or dad. And you give them some tips. And then they go out and they get a job and they come back to you and they say, well, I didn't actually follow your tips in the moment. I meant to, but I didn't. And I got the job anyway. Are you upset that they didn't use their technique or celebrating with them that they got the job? And we want you to celebrate with them.
We really do. So hopefully that helps, Gary. Try not to be upset about it and slap their hand a little bit on the whole telling your candidate we hired someone yesterday. That is unacceptable. But I'd be pretty excited that they're still interviewing your candidate for a role that they clearly filled.